Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, I am going to be answering one of the most common questions that I have received ever since the release of the 10th edition Guard Codex. Which is better, Rough Riders or the new Krieg Death Riders? Both are melee cavalry units, but both do things very differently. And so without further ado, let's not mess around today. Let's mount up, couch our lances, and charge right into this thing. Let us begin by taking a look at the Rough Riders, starting off with their stat line. Rough Riders have a movement of 12 inches. That's actually pretty good. We shouldn't just breeze past that. That does make them a bit faster than most guard vehicles. It makes them twice as fast as most guard infantry. And don't forget that these guys do have the regiment keyword. So unlike a lot of other traditional auxiliary style units like Ogryns and Bulgryns and Rattlings, these guys can actually receive orders. Being able to go up to 15 inches and be able to charge is fantastic. And you can also use this to be able to get on objectives. Remember, you can always fall back, and you can fall back a long way. So you could fall back potentially 15 inches, go from charging a unit, tying them up, falling back, going on to an objective. And then, of course, you've got the offensive capabilities. You can have these guys receiving fixed bayonets. I don't know where they're attaching the bayonets. Maybe they're adding it to the end of the lance, or maybe that they're putting it on the hooves of the horses. I'm not sure, but you can order them to fix bayonets as well. This means that, of course, they will then be hitting on 2s rather than native weapon skill 3. I know we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. We will be looking at the weapons in a moment. Long story short, movement wins games, and Rough Riders are actually pretty quick. Let's move on to their defensive profile. Toughness 4 with a 4+ save and 2 wounds is very respectable. That's like a Space Marine profile. Now don't get me wrong, this is 10th edition, and at the time of recording this is quite late 10th edition, and so the lethality has started to spike as it is wont to do in the latter half of any edition of 40k. But compare that to your typical Guardsman profile, and we are actually seeing something that can take more than just a bit of small arms to clear away. Your opponent is going to have to dedicate some half-decent firepower. We're not talking las cannons or anything here, but they can chuck a whole bunch of bolt rounds into some Rough Riders, and they might knock a few out the saddle, but they won't wipe the unit out. The enemy is going to have to actually put some small dedicated firepower to clear out a squad of 5 of these guys, and a squad of 10 will actually take some serious consideration from your opponent. Leadership 7 and objective control of 1 are very standard issue for units like this. It's leadership 7, so it's the guard, that's normal. OC 1, yep, it's not a battle line, that checks out. However, just before we breeze past the OC 1, I do want to say again, these guys can receive orders. So that does mean they can receive duty and honor. That will improve their leadership, making it easier for them to pass battle shock if they're in that situation, and will also increase their OC to 2. Now, combine that, especially the OC, with movement 12, and you do have the potential for quite a fast unit. If you don't need move, you can go quite quickly and potentially sneak objectives away from an opponent. One last thing to mention about this stat line is the points. At the time of recording, Rough Riders are 60 points. Now, if you compare that to a lot of typical 10-man guard infantry squads, which are 65 points, so actually a little bit more expensive, you realise that Rough Riders have actually got a lot to offer, because they have the same number, a 5-man squad has the same number of wounds as a 10-man infantry blob, and it's got a better save, and it's got better toughness, and it's got better movement. Of course, the one thing they don't have is long-range special weapons like plasmas and melters and whatnot, but it's still worth noting that point for point, Rough Riders are more durable than Guardsmen against small arms fire. Of course, Guardsmen are more durable against 10 Guardsmen are more durable against 2 damage weapons than the Rough Riders are. That just about blasts through the stat line. Let's take a look at the weapons, war gear, and composition. Rough Rider squads start off in unit sizes of 5, but you can take them in pretty big blocks of 10 Each Rough Rider comes with a las gun, a las pistol, a hunting lance, and steed's hooves. You're very unlikely to use the las pistol. I think that's just been included because, frankly, they've got one on the model. The las gun is okay. I mean, you get to fire a few las gun shots on the way in, but we're not really looking at these guys in terms of their ranged weapons, which is unusual for Guard. Normally, it's all about the ranged weapons, and we almost dismiss the melee capability, but this time, it's the other way around. Dismiss the range, look at the melee. In this case, we've got the, in my opinion, fantastic hunting lance as the main weapon. We'll get to the hunting lance's profile in just a moment. Before we do, I want to touch upon the war gear options. For every 5 models in this unit, 1 model's hunting lance can be replaced with a goad lance. So in a 5-man squad, that's 1 goad lance. In a 10-man squad, that's 2 goad lances. And each Rough Rider sergeant can be equipped with a power saber. As you would expect with a unit like this, it's a melee orientated unit, so the weapon options that we're getting are melee focused. But how do they all stack up against each other? Well, let's dive into it. Firstly, let's start off with the hunting lance. This has 2 firing modes. Now, if you're a veteran, if you're a grognard like me, you will remember the days of when hunting lances were 1 use only. So you got 1 charge off them, and then after that, they were basically down to close combat weapons. That is no longer the case. I need to reiterate that. You can choose each one of these firing modes each time you get into combat, and they are no longer 1 use only. If you're a new player, you're like, what the hell are you on about? Why would there be 1 use? Don't worry about it. It's just crazy mechanics of older editions. But I know there's going to be some old players who maybe come back into the game and they start only using their melter tips once and all that kind of stuff. So how does a hunting lance work? When you get into combat, when you charge, before you roll your attacks, you have to decide which tip you're going to use. Are you going to use the frag tip or the melter tip? Now, the frag tip it's the anti-infantry option. It has lance, which does give it +1 to wound, which is okay, but in my opinion, it's far too swingy. It's D6 attacks, that's per Rough Rider, so that would be 5 D6 attacks on unit 5, 10 D6 on a unit of 10. They do hit on 3s, potentially hitting on 2s with fixed bayonets, not take aim with fixed bayonets. But it's strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. You have no way of boosting the AP. It's too swingy. There's not enough armor penetration here for me, and it's only damage 1. I think the hunting lance is the way you go if you are facing some particularly light infantry. They might be okay to things like Eldar. At the end of the day, Eldar units do tend to be toughness like 3. So with lance and strength 4, you would be wounding them on 2s, which is pretty good. Hitting on 2s, wounding on 2s. Against Eldar, like Aspect Warrior stuff, you're probably thinking frag tips. Against anything else, you're going to go for the mouth tips. This should be considered the go-to firing mode outside of exceptional circumstances. The melter tip is only 1 attack, so that will be 1 per guy, so 5 in a 5-man squad, 10 in a 10-man squad. Again, it can hit on 2s. I think it should be just worth pointing out that it is bloody fantastic that the Rough Riders do hit on 3s natively. I expected them to hit on 4s natively and for them to only be worth a fart if you gave them fixed bayonets. But they can actually kind of hit relatively accurately even if they don't have fixed bayonets, which is good because it kind of plays into what we were saying before. If you need to move across open ground quickly, close distance and get that charge going on, you can go for move, and you can still hit pretty reliably. It's not like Guard infantry where you have to choose between moving quickly and shooting good. Anyway, going back to the melter tips. Their strength 9, AP -4, D6 damage. Now, the strength 9 would normally be considered a bit of a... because, obviously, against a lot of vehicles, that means you're going to wound on 5s. But don't forget, lance. So actually, you get to wound pretty much anything, even the toughest things in the game, like stompers and stuff like that, you wound them on 4s. And any infantry, any reasonable infantry, even custodians, like super heavy infantry, you're going to wound them on 2s. And there will be some light vehicles. You got to think, again, Eldar, most of their vehicles are T9, you'll be wounding them on 3s. Dark Elder, a lot of their vehicles are like T7, T8, wounding them on 2s. If you face off against other guard players, Tauroxes, you'll be wounding them on 2s, Chimeras, you'll be wounding them on 3s. So strength 9 is an okay break point. Strength 9 with Lance is very, very potent. It is D6 damage, which can be incredibly swingy. And I do feel like the Melter Lance is better when it goes into vehicles than going into multi-wound infantry. My thinking for this is, if you go into a vehicle which has got like 10 to 14 wounds, that's 1 wound pool. And even if one of your Melter Lances rolls 1 for the number of damage, and one of the Melter Lances rolls 6, you've done the average amount of damage, and you've done 7 wounds to that unit. The problem with Melter Lances when you come across the aforementioned Custodes is if the first damage roll does a 1, and the second damage roll does a 6, you've only killed 1 Custodes because they've got a pool of wounds per model. So they are good, but I do feel that they're a bit swingy. They're better off going against vehicles than they are going against very tough multi-wound infantry. They can do it, but be aware and be conscious of the fact that it might be taking 2 lances to do 1 lance's job every so often. Then we get to the Goad Lance and the Power Saber. So the Power Saber is a freebie, so you might as well take it, but I don't really see that much point in it. If you were charging against an infantry unit and you were thinking of using the frag tips, on your sergeant, you might as well use the Power Saber. It's a set amount of attacks, not a swingy D6. It's the same strength, and it's got better AP. So when attacking those Eldar and you're thinking of using frag tips, make sure you're using your sergeant's Power Saber. As for the Goad Lance, it's tricky. My instinct is to say don't take them, because the Goad Lance is not like an option, not a flexible option like the Hunting Lance. So it is good at picking up Marines. Sweet, I'm going to charge into some Marines. I'm going to have 2 set attacks. That's double that of the Melter tip. I'm going to be wounding them on 2s because the Strength 6 plus Lance. 8 minus 2, put them down to 5 save. And every wound that I get through pops a Marine. Sweet. The problem is the Goad Lance just doesn't feel that good against everything else. My instinct is to say go all Hunting Lances all of the way. Goad Lances, I'm not convinced by them, but I am open to having my mind changed. So if I always operate off gut instinct. I'm not really a math hammer kind of guy. If you have some good math hammer, or you can do a quick run through Unit Crunch or something like that, let me know how the Goad Lance stacks up against the Melter tip. My sort of experienced gut instinct led way of thinking says no dice, but I would be curious to see the numbers. Now, the last thing to look at with Rough Riders is their abilities, and that is Horse Masters. They can shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which they fell back. That is a very interesting ability. When I first looked at it, I was a bit unsure about how you would actually get good mileage out of this, because I thought when you charge your Rough Riders in, if you charge in and absolutely smash someone, then they're probably going to fall back from you, at which point you're not engaged in combat, at which point Horse Masters isn't going to be relevant. And then if someone charges your Rough Riders, well, they're probably charging you with something that's not afraid to get into melee, like some sort of Berserkers or something. And then maybe all your Rough Riders just die, and then falling back and charging, it doesn't seem like such a big deal. Where I think this is actually quite a good ability is, even if you have just a few remnants left over, let's say you have a 10-man squad or a 5-man squad, and there's just sort of 2 or 3 survivors left over from an enemy counterattack. Falling back and just a little bit to then charge back into that big gnarly unit is probably a fool's errand. If you've just been charged, let's say, by 5 Emperor's Children, and they've butchered you down to like 3, they butchered down from your 10-man squad to like 3 guys, charging back into those flawless blades or whatever it may be, it's probably a bad idea. But going move, falling back 15 inches and then going after a different threat, maybe there's like a rhino holding an objective, maybe there's like a small unit of cultists holding an objective, something like that. something that actually 3 Rough Riders can still effectively take on and bully. I think that's the way you look at this. So how I sort of feel the chain of events taking place that leads up to Horse Masters being relevant is you take your Rough Riders, smash them into an enemy unit, do your damage. Enemy counterpunches, tries to make your Rough Riders dead or combat ineffective, tries to get them down to like 2 or 3 guys. Your Rough Riders go, screw this, I'm not falling back to try and take on a proper melee threat. Instead, I'm going to fall back, let the guns deal with that melee threat, and I'm going to go after something else. I think Horse Masters is there to keep your opponent off balance, not to necessarily have your Rough Riders charging in, wheeling round, charging in, really, just going back and forth, back and forth. I think it's smash in there, bounce out, smash there. That's what I think it's for keeping them on the move and keeping them going after threats that they can handle. So, in summary, Artillery Rough Riders are a fast-moving, hard-hitting disruption unit, and you should be using them to not only countercharge and attack enemy units, but also to bounce around the battlefield, keeping your opponent off balance for as long as possible. Now we get to the Death Riders, and these guys are an entirely different story. Firstly, let's start off with that stat line. The stat line of the Death Riders is very similar to that of the Rough Riders. They've got the same toughness, save, wounds, leadership, and objective control. The big difference, and it is a surprisingly big difference, is they only have movement 10. Now, you might not think there's a big difference between 10 and 12 inches. That couple of inches doesn't make a difference, but according to Mrs. Mordian, it makes all the difference in the world. F in the chat. On a more serious note, it is important to take this into account because you have to remember that your cavalry can't just go through ruined walls. They can't go in a straight line like infantry can. So losing 2 inches means that when you're having to go round ruins, you will end up losing quite a bit of movement. And so the Rough Riders having that extra movement is very important because it allows them to have enough movement to get where they're going. Whereas the Death Riders, they often will struggle. I mean, think about it this way. How many times have you had a Chimera that hasn't quite been able to go the distance that you wanted it to get onto objective? That's because it's got a 10-inch move and it can't go in a straight line. Like, Chimeras are reasonably durable, but when you're playing on heavy and reasonably fast, but when you're playing on a heavy, dense terrain board, sometimes it can feel like infantry is quicker than tanks, because infantry can go in a straight line and tanks and vehicles have to go round. Death Riders kind of suffer from the same problem. What you tend to find is, if you want your Death Riders to go places quickly, you're going to need to have move on them. That makes them a little bit less flexible in comparison to Rough Riders, who can really benefit from move. Going 15 inches can really benefit from that. But if 12 inches is enough, then they can get fixed bayonets and they can hit hard. For me, I tend to find that Death Riders, it feels like they need, especially in the opening turns of the game where people are coming together, they often need move, and that does somewhat impact their damage output. However, that is all relative, and if you're facing off against an enemy who's got fast-moving assault units, then the 2-inch difference very well may not make a difference. So I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill here. I'm just saying that they're 2 inches slower. Bear that in mind, and you may find that you have to go for move as a default order on these guys rather than something like fixed bayonets. Let's get to the weapons and war gear, and unlike the Rough Riders, Death Riders have absolutely 0 war gear options. So they come with what they come with, and you can't change anything about that. They do come in squads of 5 to 10, and each Death Rider does come with a las carbine, a frag lance, a power saber, and a steed savage claws. So actually, them all having power sabers, not just the sergeant of the Rough Riders, is worth noting. That's pretty decent. The Death Rider las carbine, you can kind of treat it the same way that you do the las guns on the Rough Riders. It's cool. It's a assault, always 2-shot las rifle. That's cool, but it's going to be a handful of essentially las shots. It's a bit of fun, but it's not the reason you're taking these things. They're a melee unit. However, I think Death Riders suffer from a great weakness in melee. I think they suffer from a great disadvantage in comparison to Rough Riders in the melee department, and that is the fact that they only get frag lances. So they are exactly the same profile as the frag tip on the Rough Riders. They just don't have the choice of taking the melter tip. It doesn't exist. I think that's a big mistake. I think that's very silly. I think that GW should absolutely have given these guys frag and melter tips. And I think it is a very limiting factor to the unit. This unit has, in isolation, and we will come back to that point in a moment, very little capability against anything that isn't ultra light infantry. It's going to struggle against Marines. Because you go for the frag lance, and oh joy of joys, you go into a bunch of Marines, and let's say you've got a squad of 5 of these guys. That's going to be about 8, let's say about 17 and a half, 17, 18 attacks on average. Well, because you've had to move, you're going to hit with 12. Then you're going to wound with 8. And then you might kill a Marine and a half. Even if you're generous, you kill 2 Marines. It's not massive, is it? So they are good at going after Eldar. They are good at going after other guardsmen. They are good at maybe I don't even know if that maybe orcs, but orcs are T5 these days. So winning a bunch of orcs on a 4-up isn't ideal. You could say the same thing about the frag lance of the Rough Riders. Don't get me wrong, but at least the Rough Riders have got melter tips, so that if they encounter an orc army, for example, they can use those melter tips to go after battle wagons, mega knobs, other things. Death Riders find themselves going up against orcs or going up against anything that just essentially isn't guardsman equivalent infantry, and they are going to struggle. Now that might make you think about going for the power saber, and in truth, again, if we're looking at these guys in isolation, I think the power saber should be the go-to weapon. If you're going to be dealing with a bunch of light infantry anyway, in my opinion, it would be better off going for a guaranteed number of attacks, not a swingy number. And yes, you'll go from wounding on 2s against toughness 3 infantry with lance to wounding on 3s, but I would rather wound on 3s with AP -2 than do a bunch of wounds on 2s and my opponent gets their full armor save. Especially if you're thinking about Eldar. Again, I know I'm putting this in the context of Eldar a lot, but that is because obviously they're very much a faction in the Ascendancy right now, and also they do a good job of being the quintessential fragile yet elite infantry kind of army. And there's a lot of armies out there which have like toughness around toughness 3, but then have a reasonably good save, like 4-up save or a 3-up save, like a lot of Eldar aspect warriors do. And I think I would rather be kicking those aspect warriors down to a 6-up save or a 5-up save than having them just tanking things on potentially like a 3-up save. One important thing to note as well is that the Steed's Savage Claws of the Death Riders are actually AP -1. When we compare that to the Rough Riders, they have the same sort of extra attacks from the hooves, and they're the same number of attacks, weapon skill, and strength and damage, but the Death Riders actually get AP -1. So those claws on those sort of mutant horses things are actually pretty good. So if we look at this in the context of sack off the frag lance, it's Power Saber and Steed Savage Claws all the way, then actually getting 5 attacks per guy with a reasonable strength and some form of AP on each one. Again, this makes them really good for going after those 4+ save, 3+ save, T3 kind of infantry. But anything outside of that, and I think they bounce. I think they struggle to get any job done. Let's put it this way. Even if I thought that it was unlikely to do anything, if I was in a desperate position or I wanted to take a chance, I would happily throw a unit of Rough Riders into a unit of Custodes. Let's say I've shot the Custodes down to like 2 guys. I would send 5 Rough Riders into that and hope that I can just make the Custodes player fail enough of 4 model saves because I'm melter lancing the crap out of him. I wouldn't send 5 Death Riders into that. because I am confident that my 5 Death Riders would all die and achieve nothing. My Rough Riders, they might do it. Last thing to look at with the Death Riders is we've got the screening line ability. Once per turn, when an enemy unit ends a normal advance 4-block move within 9 inches of this unit, if this unit is not within engagement range of one or more enemy units, it can make a normal move of up to 6 inches. That's pretty good that it's a flat 6 inches. It's not a D6. It's similar to how if you move within termagants, they can like scuttle around like D6 inches. On paper, it looks quite good. Someone moves near you. You can move towards them to move block them, maybe stop them from charging onto the objective, or someone moves near you and you get a free reactive move. I think this is quite powerful. Before I played with Recon Guard, I poo-pooed this ability. I thought it'd be kind of tricky to get it off. But after using Recon Guard and them having that stratagem that lets you do a reactive move of pure 6 inches, that was phenomenal. Being able to do that on units was very, very good. Having that as a stratagem on one unit was great. Having that potentially on multiple units a turn is crazy. I actually think that Death Riders in Recon would be very interesting, because you could have a unit of infantry doing the 6-inch reactive move, and then you could also have units of Death Riders doing it as well. I think this is the reason you take them. We are entering a melee meta. It's here, especially if you play on UKTC and WTC terrain. We're entering a very, very much a melee meta. And being able to screw with melee armies is very important, because GW, through various nerfs and changes, has kind of gimped a lot of guard melee choices. Bulgrin's super expensive, and that's the main one. It is that Bulgrin's are super expensive, and our screening is typically not able to just tank stuff as well now, because of having like the 5+ feel no pain taken from infantry and whatnot. So really, we need ways, if we're going to struggle to actually Barney in melee with people, Strachan going as well, that was a big one. If we're going to struggle with Barneying in melee with people, we need ways of basically stopping those melee armies from connecting. And I think that screening line is very powerful. So for me, when I look at Death Riders, damage output, meh, not bothered. Screening line, if I build around it, if I'm going to a tournament where I know melee is going to be a thing, a big thing, I would strongly consider this. However, there is a twist. And there is a twist. An M. Night Shyamalan twist. Lord Marshal Dreer. So I've been kind of ragging on the Death Riders' ability to do damage. I think in isolation, that is true. I think Rough Riders are there to do damage. Death Riders don't really do that. But when you add Lord Marshal Dreer into the equation, it completely flips the script. I've already done a video detailing Lord Marshal Dreer, so I'm not going to go through every last bit here. We're just going to focus on leading the charge. So if you have him leading a unit of Death Riders, each time this model's unit makes a charge move until the end of the turn, melee weapons, any melee weapons equipped by models in that unit have the Devastating Wounds ability. Any. So if we go over to Death Riders, that means that even if we're looking at power saves, again, I would look at this through the lens of power save, because the Frag Lancers might spike and you might end up getting like 60 attacks, like a squad of 10. But I think, like, realistically, it's kind of risky, it's kind of swingy. What I would do is go for the Power Sabers and the Steed Savage Claws, because they benefit from the Devastating Wounds. A 10-man squad of Death Riders is going to put out 50 attacks, and they're going to be led by Lord Marshal Dreer. Now, if you can get them to hit on 2s, then you are going to hit with a lot of attacks. Like, off the top of my head, I'm thinking you're going to hit with about like 42, something like that, roughly. Hitting on 2s with fixed bayonets, of course. And then that's going to lead to like 6 or 7 Devastating Wounds. And then you've got Dreer's attacks on top of that. I think when I watched, shout out to Joshi40k, great YouTube channel, great guard YouTube channel. He worked it out where you could get it to a fairly reliable 8 to 9 dev wounds from Death Riders and Dreer. Now, 8 to 9 devastating wounds, suddenly this unit goes from, oh, it can't fight its way out of a wet paper bag, to it's smashing down pretty much anything it comes across. That's before you've even taken into account the rest of the damage being done by things like the Power Sabers and the Siege Savage Claws. If you're going against something a bit tougher, you might consider the Frag Lances so that you can like maybe wound them on 5s rather than 6s. But the point is that Dreer plus Death Riders equals actual damage dealing. So we've looked at everything for Rough Riders and we've looked at everything for Death Riders. So now I guess the big question is, which one's better? For me personally, my money is going to go on the Rough Riders. I think that they are, time of recording, cheaper by 10 points. I think that they are good in 5 and 10 man squads. And I think that they're faster, they do more damage, and they're still very flexible as a utility unit. Being able to go on to objectives, start auto-seeing people, being able to fall back and charge. I just think there's a lot of mileage from Rough Riders. I also find them relatively both straightforward and complex at the same time. You can just use them as a countercharge unit. I'm going to take 5 of them or even 10 of them. They're good in both sizes because they don't really need like big characters like Dreer to make them work. I'm going to take them in 5 or 10 man squads, and they're just going to go in there, and when someone hits my lines with some combat, I've actually got a unit that can go back in there and do the job. I think they are a reasonably powerful melee unit. You probably don't want them trying to take on enemy units that are completely fresh and whole, but shoot them up a little bit and then send the Rough Riders in. Yeah, I think that's a very straightforward and effective way of using them. I also think in the hands of a better player than I, being able to disrupt enemies, bouncing between them, like I said, I think that's great. So they can do objective game, they can do damage dealing game, they can help solve some of the problems guard I've got with melee. I think Rough Riders are really good, and they can do it off their own backs. Their data sheet is robust enough, and with the flexibility with those frags and those melter tips, they don't rely upon any gimmicks to get the job done. They just can do it themselves. Death Riders, on the other hand, feel a little more one-dimensional. Either you take them as a 10-man squad and you put Dreer in it, and that's the way they do damage, or you don't. They're more expensive fundamentally as well. And the Dreer combo is as expensive as a Rogel Dawn. And I feel relatively strongly like a Rogel Dawn is the better option. I think that the Dreer plus Death Rider combo, though, I don't want to crap on these guys too much because I know a lot of people really like them. I do want to make something abundantly clear. If you go for the 10-man squad with Dreer leading them, it will be expensive. There probably were more efficient choices, but that is fundamentally not a bad combo, and you can get it to work. And hey, there'll be that one game that comes up every tournament where you go, thank God I had dev wounds on demand. Of course, man. So I don't think it should be underestimated. And I do think it's a viable combo. It's just a smidge too expensive. I think that combo should come in at 200 points tops. Maybe even 190. Because it is a one-trick pony. No pun intended. However, I'm not going to say Death Riders are completely without their merits. I really like Screening Line. I really like it. I'm just worried that there's going to be plenty of games. In a 5-round tournament, I can imagine 2 out of 3 games, Screening Line saves your ass. The other 3 times, it's maybe a nice to have. So it's a good ability, but it's not always going to be a relevant ability. On the other hand, Rough Riders being able to go around and melt and lance things and being able to, like I said, do objectives, be action monkeys, all this kind of stuff, they're just so much more flexible. So to answer the question, which one do I think is better? I do prefer Rough Riders. But that's not to say Death Riders are without their own merits and without their own abilities. Of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. What has been your experience with Rough Riders? What has been your experience with Death Riders? Do you think that screening line is going to become more and more important as we go deeper and deeper into this dense terrain, melee-dominated meta? Or do you think that Rough Riders and their flexibility are always going to be able to win out? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to go ahead and smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing, truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members, so thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.